I would just like to clarify, it's 3 a.m. Yes, I'm recording myself at 3 a.m. Dedication. Guten Tag, mi amigos. My name is Shannon Menardis. I'm a personal trainer and online fitness coach, and today we're going to be talking about the back squat. Now, the back squat is one of those exercises that is a compound movement. When I say compound movement, I mean it's a full body movement. It incorporates different parts of the body, not just one isolated muscle group. And the reason why I'm talking about it today is because it's so freaking complex. And I don't mean that in like, oh, I'm dissing back squats type of way. I mean it in a being a beginner and approaching the barbell, seeing the back squat, right? It can look so easy. It's just a 1-2 done type of move, but it's actually so much more complex than we think. So that's why so many people, when they just start getting into this stuff, lifting weights, learning about compounds, the back squat can be very confusing. So my job today is to hopefully make this process a little bit more easy by providing a little step-by-step how-to. That way you guys can at least look out for the cues that you should be looking out for and feel a little bit more confident within your back squat over time. So with that being said, let's dive right into it. All right, guys. First and foremost, what I want out there into the world right off the bat is what the primary muscle groups are. When you're performing the back squat, what the main focus in terms of muscle groups is the glutes, quadriceps, and hamstrings. Even though this move is considered a full body move because when you are putting the bar on your back and lifting the elbows up, you are engaging the back to some degree. You are also engaging the core to some degree. It is considered a full body move, but you usually see people do these moves on leg days because primary muscle groups that are being hit are the legs. So as you can see right here, I am doing some banded abductions. Now, why am I doing banded abductions beforehand? What I recommend to most people, right, is that when it comes to your back squat, I feel like not enough people do glute activation work beforehand, and thus, when you're doing the back squat, you'll notice the difference if your glutes are not properly primed and warmed up. So what I recommend is usually doing a movement like hip thrusts, banded work, so banded abductions or banded lateral walks, or even frog pumps. That way, those 3 moves, usually you're going to feel some type of glute activation right off the bat if you do it right. And you don't necessarily need to go overboard with the volume or intensity because that's not the goal. We're just trying to warm up the glutes so that it can help you when you're in that bottom of the squat. So as you can see here for today, I chose the banded abductions, just a 3-way point. One in the front, one to the side, one a little bit behind. That way I can hit all angles of the glutes and feel a little bit more prepared when I'm going to do that back squat. Another note I would like to throw out there, by the way, is also practicing good hip mobility routines. So if you have maybe like 2 to 3 moves that you can throw into your warm up, that makes a world of a difference in the end, especially if you're trying to focus on depth. So there's certain movements I'd recommend. I do have a leg mobility routine. There we go. That's the word. But I do have a leg day warm up routine posted already. So I would just go to that video if you want a few ideas for your warm up. But diving right into the back squat, step 1, you got to adjust your rack. So what you want to do is adjust the rack to your size for the pins. Now, typically, this is going to be different for each and every person because obviously we're all built different. But what you want to aim for is typically around chest level for the setup. That way, when you get underneath the bar, you can properly rack that bar on the back. However way you choose to do so. We're going to talk about that more in just a second. Now, when it comes down to going higher or lower, I always say it's best to go a little bit lower if you can, just because, for example, if you're working out with friends and your friend happens to be shorter than you, it does not help to have that person go on their tippy toes with that load on their back because that just throws them into a very weird position. It can also they can hurt themselves in the end. So if you are the tall friend of the group, it's always best to go lower rather than higher. That way you can just get underneath the bar a little bit easier. You're just gonna have to squat down a bit more. So step 2 is deciding your setup. Now, when it comes to the setup, you have one of 2 options. You can either do high bar or a low bar setup. And what does that mean? I'm about to show you. So number 1, the first one we're going to show you is the high bar setup. So when you get underneath that bar and you're starting to put that bar on your back, what's going to happen is that you're going to rest the barbell on top of your trapezius, more towards the nape, the bottom part of your neck, not necessarily on top of your neck. It's just more so higher than what you'd see with a low bar setup. So usually it's lying on top of the trapezius. Now, this positioning actually requires a more proud chest and upright position. People who have a naturally bigger hip angle at the bottom of their squat, depending on, leg anatomy and ankle mobility, they tend to benefit from this setup more. What I mean by that, the fancy breakdown of that, is usually people who tend to be shorter, or like their legs, the limbs themselves are not super duper long. They typically find it more comfortable to be in the squat. This is personally something I struggle with because a high bar setup is very uncomfortable for me since my limbs tend to be longer when it comes to my legs. So when I'm in the bottom of the squat, the hip angle that I have is a lot smaller than someone who has a bigger hip angle. Like, they can actually sit up more, right? So that is something to consider when you are squatting. Your height does affect what your squat looks like. It's not going to look the same as every single person or every single peer around you, right? So that's why you have to really perfect your own squat as opposed to working off what someone else is telling you that they might be just saying based off their squat. Another side note I want to throw out there is that when you are setting up the bar, you are pulling the bar into your body, as this helps with managing the weight over time, especially just keeping the back engaged. You want to make sure that you're pulling that bar into your upper back. That's one thing you do not want to give slack on or lose tension with. Now, the low bar setup. Like I said before, if you are on the taller side, you might benefit from this setup a little bit more than the other one. As you can see here, it is further down on the back. It's more mid-trap and rear delts in terms of bar placement. And naturally, you're going to see the body lean forward more with a low bar squat. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's just something to consider if you're so used to seeing people with a proud chest. That's not typically something you would see with a low bar setup, because what's happening is that you have a smaller hip angle at the bottom of the squat, meaning that you're probably leaning forward. And when you look at this squat right here, as you can see, naturally I am leaning forward more with the low bar setup. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually find it a lot more comfortable in terms of managing the weight on my back. But again, this differs from person to person. So you just have to figure out which bar setup is benefit to you. Which one do you feel more comfortable with and stable with? Because that is what matters the most in the end. It doesn't matter if I choose a low bar setup and you just do it because I'm doing it. No, it really depends on the person and your anatomy. Now, with the next step, this is very important, okay? Plates and clips. You want to make sure to remind yourself to put clips on each side of the barbell. And when you're loading the plates, do so accordingly, where it's one side to the other side, not all sides at once. Just because, trust me, you don't want to be that person that puts 3 plates on one end and you take them off and then whoop, just that chip flies, man. It's not good. You don't want to be that person. I've been that person. It's embarrassing. Don't do it. All right, guys, this next step is going to be a long one because we are going to be talking about basic cues. Yep, that's right. All the cues are going to be in this little segment right here. So number 1, let's talk neck extension and flexion. You do not want to have a very excessive amount of motion there. In fact, it's just more of a neutral neck. You want to just keep your chin up as much as you can, but not so much so that you're suddenly pushing the chest forward and extending the neck so weirdly that it's so uncomfortable, right? Like this type of... You do not want to be doing this shit. No bueno. This shit. No bueno. But yeah, when it comes to the neck, you do not want excessive motion happening during that back squat, as it's going to just contribute to instability and possibly throw you off even more. Next cue, no chest caving. Make sure to have a proud chest as much as you can. Watch for pelvis tucking excessively or any weird lordotic curve. I believe I said that. Lordosis. Lordotic? Adjective? I don't know. I wish I had a good memory. College days. Come on. When it comes to this, when I say lordotic curve, it just means don't stick out your butt in an excessive way. I always like to remind people as if it's like, Paris Hilton. If you're taking the selfie, little booty pop, you want to make sure not to push out the butt so much that the pelvis just does this really excessive rounding at the bottom of your spine. But you also don't want to tuck it so much that it's like you can't even control it anymore because it's so excessively tucked in that you just look like an old man kind of and I'm doing this shit. And that's not normal either. But another cue you can look out for is knees can track over the toes. When it comes to this industry, information sometimes gets, misshared and things pop up way more than usual. For example, like lactic acid, how that makes you sore. It's not really what makes you sore, but it's what the industry pumps out. So when it comes to knees over toes, this is something that you can see happen and it's natural. You do not have to avoid it like the plague. Just have that normal amount of knee flexion, and if it goes over your toes, that's fine. Now, the next cue to look out for is to make sure to brace your core, reset every single rep if you can. Just to give you a little simple way to remember, right? Before every single rep you do, act as if someone is about to punch you in the gut. Okay, like literally this dude is just like, let's go. What's going to happen is you're going to naturally squeeze in the musculature, trying to brace for impact and protect your organs, because that's just how the body works. When you see that happening, you kind of start getting a little bit more tense there, right? So it's not holding your breath. You're not holding it. Brace the core, commit to the squat, and then on the way up, that's when you can let go of that breath, but don't try to let go of all your core stability. You want to make sure to keep the core engaged throughout the rep. That way, middle section of your body is nice and stable. The next step we're going to focus on here is the bar path. Now, I actually took off the bottom rack so you can see what's happening with the bar path and what's going on with where it should hopefully end up in terms of with the feet. Now, I think this day I had some pretty shitty hip mobility, and I'm just being honest with you guys. It wasn't perfect, the bar path, but what you're trying to aim to do here is to have the bar go over the midfoot at all times. So as you can see, I do shift forward naturally here. What you want to do is hopefully just go straight down. That's it, straight up. Very simple, but it's a lot harder than one would think, because what's happening is it can be affected by your hip mobility, your ankle mobility, your core stability, and even your bar placement. All of this can throw off how the bar ends up looking in terms of bar path. The next step is a concept that not everyone talks about, but I think it's a super important thing to throw out there. Utilizing the feet. As you can see, I'm taking off my shoes. We're going barefoot, baby. Now, what's going to happen when you go barefoot is basically you're going to be able to sprawl out the toes a little bit better. And wait, oh no. Yep, that's a toe cramp. Going further though, what's going to happen is you're going to have the ability to actually sprawl out your toes. Let's pretend this is your foot, right? Instead of my fingers, this is your foot. When it comes to more narrow shoes, what's going to happen is you're going to see the toes come in and be kind of squished in together. So this is a disadvantage for a lot of people, because what you want to do is have a solid foundation in your squat. And what allows for that better than being able to sprawl your toes and actually use them to your advantage, right? So when it comes to certain shoes such as like Converse, Nike, they're going to have more narrow soles. Is that the part of the shoe? I don't know shoes that well, but the top portion of the shoe, it's going to come in more narrow with the toes, so you're going to be more squished in, which is why people who wear these shoes, they might lose balance more in their squats. So if possible, I say it's best to utilize your feet. And if that means, taking off your shoes just so you have the ability to spread those toes out more so you can actually maintain that balance better, 100% I'd say do it, because it just makes a world of a difference. And I keep saying world of a difference, but trust me, these cues, they do make a world of a difference in the end. All right, guys, this is going to be the last and final step to look out for, but we're going to talk about managing the knees. Such an attractive angle right here. Oh my gosh. Easiest way to remember this is to say, watch the wobble. You do not want the knees wobbling like crazy. So as you can see here in the bottom of the squat, my knees do tend to come in slightly just because I do have a wider stance approach here. This is something that I would hope to manage over time, just because it is something I've always struggled with, is having that kind of knee cave, which is not good in the long run. You do not want to have your knees overcompensating for the motion by excessively coming in or even excessively staying out to where you can't even keep the alignment of the knees. It's just falling apart. The best thing you can do is to make sure that oh God, what is that? But yes, when it comes down to your knees, you want to make sure to try to manage the motion as much as you can. But yeah, guys, that's all I have for you today in terms of cues and how-tos for the back squat. If you guys want to check out my socials, they are Shan Lifts and Insanity, depending on the platform. And thank you again for watching the video.